Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all you are doing fine. This is the next part of Magus of the Wizarding World. So let's start without any delay. Chapter 111, Mudbloods and Snails. The next few days passed without trouble for Matthew. His Magitech drones are making steady progress in the Room of Hidden Things, although they did not found anything major yet. At least he gained a few interesting notes depicting spell and potion research he didn't think of yet. Like an alternative version of the levitation spell, instead of like the standard version which was basically lifting an object with an invisible magic hand, this one was based on gravity manipulation. They found the notes in a schoolbook used in 1604. This spell was developed by a Hogwarts student. His final target was to fly. He based his ideas on the research of Jarlath Hobart, who also wanted to fly and invented the levitation charm in 1544. Interestingly, the student whose name he didn't know realized the existence of gravity. A wizard, a student discovered gravity good 80 years before Newton published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. But that were the only unexpected gains yet. Still, the basics of manipulating gravity with magic would be useful. While his lessons this year were mostly unspectacular, the only ones that were of interest to him were Transfiguration, in which they were currently studying cross-species switches, and ancient runes. Cross-species switches may sound unspectacular, but transfiguring another human into a ferret or pig also fell into that category, and that piqued Matthew's interest. How did it work? After all, it was pretty much a feat of reality bending. Malfoy seemed to be aware of who he was when the fake Moody turned him into a ferret and kept his memories of that event. How was that possible? After all, human and ferret physiology was completely different. So Matthew spent his time in Transfiguration analyzing and finding the truth to these questions. He had no problem completing this kind of spells. After all, he was already further ahead. At this point, all he could improve on were his understanding and mastery. In ancient runes, they would have to complete a rune enchantment project as an exam this year, which they had time to complete over the whole year. Matthew had no problem completing that task. He rather was unsure of what he should do. He didn't want to hand over just anything, but also nothing too advanced. So he was still in the middle of his brainstorming phase. He still kept working on potions and created new ones all the time. Some of them he sold and added them to his income. But he limited himself to 2 or 3 a.m. year and nothing too groundbreaking, since he didn't want to gain unwanted attention. The problem was he reached a low in his progress. He could create many potions, but none of them were majorly useful for him. While something like improving his body permanently or a complex problem like curing lycanthropy was out of his grasp and he had no idea how to solve it. Scene break. On Saturday, as he was following his usual workout routine, he was joined by the Gryffindor team at the Quidditch training grounds where he normally worked out. Hey guys, how are you? So would you make them train even earlier than usual this year? Greeted Matthew while he tried to hold back his snicker as he watched the tired Gryffindor team in their red Quidditch robes. Matthew, are you here to spy on us? Asked Wood with suspicion. Why would I be here to spy on you? I was first here. Are you here to spy on me? Retorted Matthew. The twins couldn't keep their laughter at that comment. While Woods's mouth dropped open at that retort, unsure of how to reply. Don't worry, Wood. I have no interest in your training strategy. Just here for my regular workout routine that I follow every morning. This is the time I always train to keep myself fit. Explained Matthew while deciding to prank Wood, and even if I wanted to spy on you I don't need to. Your secret plan is probably something like harder, earlier and longer. Am I right? He asked as he looked at the rest of the team who all couldn't hold their laughter now. We can share the field. I will keep at that side and won't disturb you. Are you fine with that? I like fairness, so I won't share anything, okay? Fine. Sighed Wood as he turned to his team and began their training. He pushed the Gryffindor literally through the mud. After a while, they were joined by Ron and Hermione, who also got accused as spy by Wood. After getting stared down by her as if he was an idiot, he had no choice but to accept her presence. They just came from breakfast and wanted to see how Harry was doing. Asterisk click asterisk asterisk click asterisk asterisk click asterisk resounded over the Quidditch field. And there was Colin Creevey taking pictures of Harry. Matthew could see how pissed Wood was. But the Gryffindor captain didn't get far in accusing the oblivious fanboy as a Slytherin spy. The Slytherins don't need a spy, Oliver said. George. What makes you say that? Said Wood testily. Because they're here in person, said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking onto the field, broomsticks in their hands. I don't believe it. Wood hissed in outrage. I booked the field for today. We'll see about this. Wood shot toward the ground, landing rather harder than he meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred, and George followed. While Matthew watched that spectacle from the side, it after all had nothing to do with him yet. Flint! Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain. This is our practice time. We got up specially. You can clear off now. Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of trollish cunning on his face as he replied, "Plenty of room for all of us, Wood." Angelina, Alicia, and Katie had come over, too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. But I booked the field, said Wood, positively spitting with rage. I booked it. And the situation continued to further escalate as Malfoy got introduced as the new Seeker of the Slytherin team thanks to a generous donation from his father. Ron and Hermione also joined them in order to find out what was happening. I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley said Malfoy, smugly. Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father's bought our team. Ron gaped, open-mouthed, at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. And Malfoy continued to mock him as Hermione interjected. At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in, said Hermione sharply. They got in on pure talent. The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood, he spat. This was the moment the whole situation escalated completely and Matthew realized his mistake. Originally he wanted to curse Malfoy secretly as punishment. Shit, Ron's wand isn't broken. This is bad. He hurried in their direction, realizing how ugly it could become. While he headed their way, he watched how Ron's curse impacted Malfoy and the blonde racist began to spit out snails. This was obviously an insult the Slytherins couldn't let sit on them, and curses began to fly between both groups. Luckily Matthew was already close enough. With a wave of his wand, a blue glowing barrier made of hexagonal layered shields appeared between both groups and blocked the barrage of their spells. And no moment too late, from the side of the Slytherin students he recognized some rather dark ones like a bone-breaking curse. The sudden appearance of the shield made both sides stop, slightly confused, while Hermione was visibly relieved. Are you done, you idiots? Asked Matthew with a dangerous tone in his voice. Who do you think you are, Mudblood? asked Warrington, his rival, as he raised his wand against Matthew. Matthew with a quick motion stunned him with a silently cast stunning charm. That idiot never learns. Anybody else? Asked Matthew as he stared down at the Slytherin students. Chapter 111, Mudbloods and Snails. The next few days passed without trouble for Matthew. His Magitech drones are making steady progress in the Room of Hidden Things, although they did not found anything major yet. At least he gained a few interesting notes depicting spell and potion research he didn't think of yet. Like an alternative version of the levitation spell, instead of like the standard version which was basically lifting an object with an invisible magic hand, this one was based on gravity manipulation. They found the notes in a schoolbook used in 1604. This spell was developed by a Hogwarts student. His final target was to fly. He based his ideas on the research of Jarlath Hobart, who also wanted to fly and invented the levitation charm in 1544. Interestingly, the student whose name he didn't know realized the existence of gravity. A wizard, a student discovered gravity good 80 years before Newton published Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. But that were the only unexpected gains yet. Still, the basics of manipulating gravity with magic would be useful. While his lessons this year were mostly unspectacular, the only ones that were of interest to him were Transfiguration, in which they were currently studying cross-species switches, and ancient runes. Cross-species switches may sound unspectacular, but transfiguring another human into a ferret or pig also fell into that category, and that piqued Matthew's interest. How did it work? After all, it was pretty much a feat of reality bending. Malfoy seemed to be aware of who he was when the fake Moody turned him into a ferret and kept his memories of that event. How was that possible? After all, human and ferret physiology was completely different. So Matthew spent his time in Transfiguration analyzing and finding the truth to these questions. He had no problem completing this kind of spells. After all, he was already further ahead. At this point, all he could improve on were his understanding and mastery. In ancient runes, they would have to complete a rune enchantment project as an exam this year, which they had time to complete over the whole year. Matthew had no problem completing that task. He rather was unsure of what he should do. He didn't want to hand over just anything, but also nothing too advanced. So he was still in the middle of his brainstorming phase. He still kept working on potions and created new ones all the time. Some of them he sold and added them to his income. But he limited himself to 2 or 3 a.m. year and nothing too groundbreaking, since he didn't want to gain unwanted attention. The problem was he reached a low in his progress. He could create many potions, but none of them were majorly useful for him. While something like improving his body permanently or a complex problem like curing lycanthropy was out of his grasp and he had no idea how to solve it. Scene break. On Saturday, as he was following his usual workout routine, he was joined by the Gryffindor team at the Quidditch training grounds where he normally worked out. "Hey guys, how are you? So would you make them train even earlier than usual this year?" greeted Matthew while he tried to hold back his snicker as he watched the tired Gryffindor team in their red Quidditch robes. "Matthew, are you here to spy on us?" asked Wood with suspicion. "Why would I be here to spy on you? I was first here. Are you here to spy on me?" retorted Matthew. The twins couldn't keep their laughter at that comment. While Woods's mouth dropped open at that retort, unsure of how to reply. "Don't worry, Wood. I have no interest in your training strategy. Just here for my regular workout routine that I follow every morning." This is the time I always train to keep myself fit," explained Matthew while deciding to prank Wood, "and even if I wanted to spy on you I don't need to. Your secret plan is probably something like harder, earlier and longer. Am I right?" he asked as he looked at the rest of the team who all couldn't hold their laughter now. "We can share the field. I will keep at that side and won't disturb you. Are you fine with that? I like fairness, so I won't share anything, okay?" "Fine," sighed Wood as he turned to his team and began their training. He pushed the Gryffindor literally through the mud. After a while, they were joined by Ron and Hermione, who also got accused as spy by Wood. After getting stared down by her as if he was an idiot, he had no choice but to accept her presence. They just came from breakfast and wanted to see how Harry was doing. Click click resounded over the Quidditch field. And there was Colin Creevey taking pictures of Harry. Matthew could see how pissed Wood was. But the Gryffindor captain didn't get far in accusing the oblivious fanboy as a Slytherin spy. "The Slytherins don't need a spy," Oliver said. "George." "What makes you say that?" said Wood testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking onto the field, broomsticks in their hands. "I don't believe it," Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the field for today. We'll see about this." Wood shot toward the ground, landing rather harder than he meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred, and George followed. While Matthew watched that spectacle from the side, it after all had nothing to do with him yet. "Flint!" Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain. "This is our practice time. We got up specially. You can clear off now." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of trollish cunning on his face as he replied, "Plenty of room for all of us, Wood." Angelina, Alicia, and Katie had come over, too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team, who stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. "But I booked the field," said Wood, positively spitting with rage. "I booked it." And the situation continued to further escalate as Malfoy got introduced as the new Seeker of the Slytherin team thanks to a generous donation from his father. Ron and Hermione also joined them in order to find out what was happening. "I'm the new Slytherin Seeker," Weasley said Malfoy, smugly. "Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father's bought our team." Ron gaped, open-mouthed, at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. And Malfoy continued to mock him as Hermione interjected. "At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in," said Hermione sharply. "They got in on pure talent." The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood," he spat. This was the moment the whole situation escalated completely and Matthew realized his mistake. Originally he wanted to curse Malfoy secretly as punishment. "Shit, Ron's wand isn't broken. This is bad." He hurried in their direction, realizing how ugly it could become. While he headed their way, he watched how Ron's curse impacted Malfoy and the blonde racist began to spit out snails. This was obviously an insult the Slytherins couldn't let sit on them, and curses began to fly between both groups. Luckily Matthew was already close enough. With a wave of his wand, a blue glowing barrier made of hexagonal layered shields appeared between both groups and blocked the barrage of their spells. And no moment too late, from the side of the Slytherin students he recognized some rather dark ones, like a bone-breaking curse. The sudden appearance of the shield made both sides stop, slightly confused, while Hermione was visibly relieved. "Are you done, you idiots?" asked Matthew with a dangerous tone in his voice. Who do you think you are, Mudblood? Asked Warrington, his rival, as he raised his wand against Matthew. Matthew with a quick motion stunned him with a silently cast stunning charm. That idiot never learns. Anybody else? Asked Matthew as he stared down at the Slytherin students. Chapter 113, Deathday. October arrived and his time at Hogwarts was pretty uneventful. Since the confrontation between the Slytherin and Gryffindor Quidditch team, not much happened. Although all members of House Slytherin gained a look of wariness on their faces. His display of strength had gained their respect, but at the same time, their jealousy put them on guard of him. But like you would expect of Slytherins, they didn't dare to make any moves on him since they did not really know his true capabilities and choose a wait-and-see approach. His classes continued as expected, although he didn't learn much new. The experience of the professors were still invaluable. During the self-study lessons, he mainly focused on defense of the dark arts and the creation of new spells. With his expanded database of knowledge, he managed to create more powerful versions of many of his charms cast with the help of runes. Their only disadvantage was their slower casting speed, but if he had enough preparation time like a proper wizard always should, they would become an essential part of his magic arsenal. Ginny's constitution became worse over the last few weeks. The Horcrux was feeding on her life force, the same energy source a Philosopher's Stone was made of. Interestingly, her soul force wasn't affected, although her soul itself became more dormant, which allowed the Horcrux inside the diary to take over her body from time to time. This whole process was interesting to observe and allowed Matthew to gather a lot of valuable data. Currently, he was on his way to the Room of Requirements. His Magitech drones finally found something with very exotic energy readings, although they couldn't identify the purpose of the artifact. These unique readings intrigued Matthew to take a look at that artifact. It wasn't the first enchanted artifact his drones found, but it was the first one they couldn't tell the purpose of. The exotic energy surrounding it interfered with their artificial eyes, which made any visual data sent to him uselessly. The other artifacts they found were common and Matthew could create them better if he needed to, they were only useful to make some cash. Once he arrived inside the Room of Hidden Things, he could already see the visible changes to the room. It was clearly emptier than before, although still full of things. But these things in the front consisted mostly of useless junk with no real use for Matthew or no great worth. His drones are nowhere seen, but he could hear how they worked deeper inside the labyrinth of objects. Matthew directly approached his trunk resting on the floor close to the entrance. Inside the last compartment, he found the interesting object. It couldn't be, muttered Matthew as he stared at the object now resting in his hands. An hourglass made of crystal surrounded by rings of dark metal, that was rusted over the ages. It hung on a long chain equally rusted as the ring. Inside the crystal hourglass was glowing sun, the source of the strange energy given off by the artifact. I can't believe my luck, this is a time turner. How the hell does an artifact with the ability to time travel get abandoned in a school full of kids? Aren't they strictly regulated by the Ministry? Specifically the Department of Mysteries? Wondered Matthew as he observed the necklace resting in his hands. Does it work? Wondered Matthew. Besides being rusted, it looked as if it was intact. It should work, but he would first perform some tests on it and let one of his drones try it out before using it himself. He knew how they worked in principle, and that the sand inside was called the Sand of Time, an alchemical product whose production method was lost over the ages. And nobody found a way to experiment on the existing one since it was a highly unstable product once removed from its specially prepared container. the hourglass, it would cause a violent reaction with unknown consequences for people close by. The theory is that they got permanently displaced in time or just died through accelerated aging. Such a reaction would last until the energy inside the sand itself would replenish, since it only had a limited amount of energy. It would replenish the energy itself, which allowed its user to travel for a few hours back in time indefinitely. The longer the jump, the more energy it cost, and if the jumps were too far or too many in a short period, it would empty itself forever. But this discovery was a major boon for Matthew, who was mostly running out of time these days. Scene break. Saturday, Halloween, the 31st of October, 1992. At 7 o'clock, Matthew and Hermione met up with Harry and Ron, who didn't look like they wanted to be here. Their look became even more regretful as the group passed straight past the doorway to the packed Great Hall, which was glittering invitingly with gold plates and candles, with a wonderful smell of pumpkins passing them, and directed their steps instead toward the dungeons. "A promise is a promise," Hermione reminded Harry bossily, and Matthew had to chuckle at that. "You said you'd go to the Death Day party. Come on, it isn't so bad. You will have the chance to attend the Halloween party next year again. But an invitation to a Death Day celebration is a unique opportunity. It's rare for the living to attend one. You should be honored. Sir Nicholas must have a really high opinion of you, Harry," commented Matthew as Harry blushed a bit. The passageway leading to Nearly Headless Nick's party had been lined with candles, too, though the effect was far from cheerful. These were long, thin, jet-black tapers, all burning bright blue, casting a dim, ghostly light even over their own living faces. The temperature dropped with every step they took. A sound as if thousands of fingers scraped on a blackboard came from their target. "Is that supposed to be music?" Ron whispered. They turned a corner and saw Nearly Headless Nick standing at a doorway hung with black velvet drapes. "My dear friends," he said mournfully. "Welcome, welcome, so pleased you could come." He swept off his plumed hat and bowed them inside. "Thank you for the invitation, Sir Nicholas. I am honored for this opportunity that most of the livings get never to witness," thanked Matthew as they entered the hall. "You are welcome, Matthew," beamed Sir Nicholas a bit with pride through his mournfulness. It was an incredible sight. The dungeon was full of hundreds of pearly white, translucent people, mostly drifting around a crowded dance floor, waltzing to the dreadful, quavering sound of 30 musical saws, played by an orchestra on a raised, black-draped platform. A chandelier overhead blazed midnight blue with 1,000 more black candles. Their breath rose in a mist before them. It was like stepping into a freezer. The group began to explore the venue. There were many ghosts present besides the inhabitants of Hogwarts. While they dodged the moaning Myrtle, one of the first victims of Voldemort, they discovered the food served at the celebration. On the other side of the dungeon was a long table, also covered in black velvet. The second year approached it eagerly, but the next moment had stopped in their tracks, horrified. The smell was quite disgusting, while Matthew chuckled at them. Large, rotten fish was laid on handsome silver platters. Cakes, burned charcoal black, were heaped on salvers. There was a great maggoty haggis, a slab of cheese covered in furry green mold, and, in pride of place, an enormous grey cake in the shape of a tombstone, with tar-like icing forming the words. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy-Porpington. Died 31 St. October, 1492. Matthew left them a bit on their own as he spotted the Grey Lady, the ghost of House Ravenclaw, and approached. "Good day, Lady Helena," greeted Matthew, the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw. Chapter 114, Surprise at the Basilisk Attack. During her lifetime Helena Ravenclaw was a tall witch, with waist-length hair. It was probably dark-colored, but since she was a ghost but instead of glowing blue she was grey still, while translucent it was hard to tell. While she was alive she must have been quite the beauty, but it was hard to tell through her proud and haughty appearance. She wore a floor-length cloak. She looked at Matthew and recognized him since she frequented the Ravenclaw Tower, although didn't communicate much with the students. "You are one of the Ravenclaws. What are you doing here? And how did you know my name?" she asked with a wary look on her face, probably being reminded of another student who realized that the Grey Lady was Helena Ravenclaw. That student was also known as Tom Riddle. "Oh, sorry, I didn't want to offend you, Lady Ravenclaw. But since you recognized me as a Ravenclaw, you should realize it isn't hard to tell if a person is observant and sharp enough, which I am both. As for why I'm here, Sir Nicholas invited me alongside Harry Potter." "I see. What do you need of me?" she asked quite coldly. "I require nothing of you. Instead, there is something I can do for you. Not only did I complete your mother's legacy which she left for future generations, I also probably solved your greatest regret," explained Matthew. "It can't be. He tainted it with his dark magic. It is too dangerous for students, you should stay away from it," warned Helena, now visibly distraught. "No worries, Lady Ravenclaw. I already cleansed it." He didn't want to drop the exact details in public, since you never knew who was listening. "How about we meet tomorrow night at midnight in the Ravenclaw Tower? We can talk about it more deeply without interruption," offered Matthew. "Okay, we will talk tomorrow at midnight," she said with a cold look as her face was full of suspicion. As Matthew left the Grey Lady, he looked around the party as he searched for the Golden Trio. Sarah was working full-time scanning as many ghosts as possible, gathering a lot of information about them. After a while, he found them together with the moaning Myrtle and Peeves, who were currently bullying the ghost girl. "Don't lie to me," Myrtle gasped, tears now flooding down her face, while Peeves chuckled happily over her shoulder. "Do you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fat Myrtle. Ugly Myrtle. Miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle." Just as Peeves was to whisper into her ear, Matthew interrupted them. "Fuck off, Peeves, or do you want me to seal you in a bottle again for a few weeks?" threatened Matthew. He created a nice charm in the past which allowed him to seal ghosts into objects and used it frequently on Peeves as revenge for some pranks they tried to pull on him. "Matthew, you brat. I will remember that," yelled Peeves as he flew away. "Don't cry, Myrtle," tried Matthew to calm the crying ghost girl, to no avail as she flew away while crying. Peeves' words already hit a critical point. "Oh, dear," said Hermione sadly. After they talked a bit with Sir Nicholas, who was still not admitted into the Headless Hunt because he wasn't fully beheaded. After a speech of the Gryffindor house ghost, the group of living decided to leave the party of the dead. In hope of still getting some dessert, they headed in direction of the Great Hall, while Matthew anticipated Harry hearing a voice in the wall. He was ready to record more of Parseltongue since he already knew what the basilisk would say. In the end, it would help him create a translation and learn the language himself. "Pudding might not be finished yet," said Ron hopefully, leading the way toward the steps to the entrance hall. And then Harry stopped. There it was, a hissing sound like a snake coming from the walls. "Rip, tear, kill. There it is. Record it, Sarah." "Wait, what?" Not only did Harry halt in his steps, but Matthew was also shocked. "Did I just understand what the basilisk was saying?" I didn't imagine that because I remember the scene from the movies. Sarah, did it really happen just now? Beep. Affirmative. The host seems to have understood the basilisk. Harry, what are you? It's that voice again. Shut up a minute. So hungry, for so long. Listen, said Harry urgently, and Ron and Hermione froze, watching him, while Matthew pretended to do the same. Kill, time to kill. The basilisk voice was growing fainter as it headed through the pipes away from them. Under the lead of Harry they ran after the voice he was hearing. During the chase Matthew was in high tension, hoping he didn't have to fight the basilisk. Luckily he wore his protective glasses since the start of the year. Although some students wondered why he was wearing them, he had stated for medical reasons, so they weren't wondering anymore. Harry sprinted up the marble staircase to the first floor, Ron, Hermione, and Matthew clattering behind him. Away from the rustling sound of the great hall where the students were still feasting following the basilisk who had begun to smell blood. It's going to kill someone, he shouted, and ignoring Ron's and Hermione's bewildered faces, he ran up the next flight of steps 3 at a time. Harry hurtled around the whole of the second floor, Ron and Hermione panting behind him while Matthew had no trouble following with his excellent stamina, not stopping until they turned a corner into the last, deserted passage. Harry, what was that all about? Said Ron, wiping sweat off his face. I couldn't hear anything. But Hermione gave a sudden gasp, pointing down the corridor. Look! There it was, shining on the wall was an ominous message written in blood, illuminated by the light of the flickering torches. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. What's that thing, hanging underneath? Said Ron, a slight quiver in his voice. On the floor was a large puddle of water, that the basilisk released once it left the pipe. Somewhere there must be an entrance to the pipe system, and with it to the chamber. Realized Matthew as he memorized the location so he could take a look at a later point in time. Below the message on a torch bracket was Mr. Norris hanging from her tail in a lifeless petrified state. She is petrified, muttered Matthew as he touched the cat and cast a few scanning charms with his wand. This was after all the first victim of the basilisk and the chance for him to confirm whether his protective glasses would work against the basilisk. Petrified? Asked Hermione while staring at the lifeless cat with a sad look. Shouldn't we try to help her? Asked Harry awkwardly before being interrupted by Ron. We should leave now. Trust me, we don't want to be found here, replied Ron. Too late, muttered Matthew as he saw the students on his mental map. A rumble, as though of distant thunder, told them that the feast had just ended. From either end of the corridor where they stood came the sound of hundreds of feet climbing the stairs, and the loud, happy talk of well-fed people. The next moment, students were crashing into the passage from both ends. The chatter, the bustle, the noise died suddenly as the people in front spotted the hanging cat. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Matthew stood alone, in the middle of the corridor, as silence fell among the mass of students pressing forward to see the grisly sight. Enemies of the air, beware. You'll be next, mudbloods, shouted someone from the crowd. Obviously, the pompous idiot needs attention again, sighed Matthew. Chapter 115, Accusations. Just at this moment, an old, rough voice resounded from behind the crowd of students. What's going on here? What's going on? Argus Filch, the old rheumatic and hunchbacked caretaker, arrived and was pushing through the crowd. Attracted by Malfoy's plea for attention, he headed in their direction. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell back, clutching his face in horror. My cat. My cat. What's happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked. Suddenly his eyes fell on Matthew, who still had his wand in his hand, as he had cast diagnostic charms on Mrs. Norris not long ago and was on high caution for a possible basilisk attack outside of his knowledge. Oh shit. You. What did you do to my cat? He screamed while pointing at Matthew. You killed her. Calm down, Mr. Filch. She isn't dead. We just found her. Tried Matthew to explain while getting a headache from this whole situation. I don't believe you. You've murdered my cat. You've killed her. I'll kill you. He screeched as he was about to jump on Matthew. Argus. This was the moment Dumbledore and the other teachers arrived. The headmaster passed the bystanders and approached the cat hanging from the torch bracket and detached it after a short moment of observation. Come with me, Argus, he said to Filch. You, too, Mr. Mason, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger. And another blonde idiot needs attention. Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. My office is nearest, headmaster, just upstairs. Please feel free. Thank you, Gilderoy, said Dumbledore. The now silent crowd of students parted, letting Dumbledore through. Lockhart, looking excited and important, hurried after Dumbledore, so did Professors McGonagall and Snape. As they stepped into Lockhart's office, which was also filled with portraits of himself, Dumbledore put Mrs. Norris carefully on the desk and began to inspect her. The tip of Dumbledore's long, crooked nose was barely an inch from Mrs. Norris's fur. He was looking at her closely through his half-moon spectacles, his long fingers gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall was bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape loomed behind them, half in shadow, wearing a most peculiar expression. It was as though he was trying hard not to smile. And Lockhart was hovering around all of them, making suggestions. It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably the transmogrify and torture. I've seen it used many times, so unlucky I wasn't there. I know the very counter curse that would have saved her. Come on. No, it wasn't. Interrupted Matthew, annoyed by the idiot, as all eyes in the room fell on him. She isn't even dead. Mrs. Norris was petrified through very dark magic. According to my diagnostic charms, it wasn't wizard magic but something else entirely. I never saw or read anything about something similar with this kind of signature. Explained Matthew. You are just a student, you have no idea what you are talking about, boy. Don't interrupt the prof, commented Lockhart, pissed off by Matthew's disrespect of him. I believe Mr. Mason is right. Resounded the voice of Dumbledore, who just finished casting spells with his wand. Mrs. Norris seems to be indeed petrified, said Dumbledore as his eyes met Matthew's, who suddenly felt a push against his occlumency shields. Not being surprised, he steeled the strength of his shields and didn't let the headmaster peek into his mind, who quickly withdrew his legilimency probe. That was uncalled for, headmaster. You shouldn't use legilimency on your students, replied Matthew with a distrustful voice. Albus. You didn't, exclaimed Professor McGonagall with shock in her voice. I'm sorry, Minerva, but I had to confirm their innocence. The situation is very serious, and as the headmaster I have the permission to safely use a mind probe on students if required. Mr. Mason's shields are very powerful even from my perspective and didn't allow me to take a look. But I could confirm their innocence through a quick probe of the other three, explained the old man. Mr. Filch was meanwhile still crying over his cat as the headmaster turned to him. She's not dead, Argus, he said softly. Not dead. choked Filch, looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. But why's she all stiff and frozen? She has been petrified, said Dumbledore. But how? I cannot say. Ask him. Shrieked Filch, turning his blotched and tear-stained face to Matthew. He had his wand in his hand. He must have cursed her. No, Mr. Mason is innocent, said Dumbledore firmly. He and the other 3 students just found her first. Mr. Mason was trying to find a way to help her, that's why he used his wand. He did it, he did it. Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. Potter found, in my office, he told him I'm a, Filch's face worked horribly. He knows I'm a squib. He finished. I didn't know you were a squib. Sighed Matthew in expiration, and Harry probably doesn't even know what a squib is or that you are one. He lived his whole life in the non-magical world. And there is no course in Hogwarts actually introducing the common knowledge of the wizarding world. Excuses. I want someone punished. Screamed Filch. If I might speak, Headmaster, lacking education aside, said Snape from the shadows. Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said, a slight sneer curling his mouth as though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why was he in the upstairs corridor at all? Why wasn't he at the Halloween feast? With all respect, Professor. This is at most circumstantial evidence. It doesn't matter what we were doing in the corridor. Shot Matthew back, protecting the younger students with him. The headmaster already confirmed our innocence through a mind probe, which he did because of the special circumstances. But if you want to know, we visited the death party of Sir Nicholas today. There are hundreds of ghostly eyewitnesses for that, and we're now on the way to the kitchens to get something to eat. We wanted to use the secret corridor behind the portrait on the 2nd floor when we came across Mrs. Norris. Explained Matthew, covering Harry, earning more of his goodwill. HMPF. I see. Replied Snape, disappointed, who missed an opportunity to punish Harry just now. But I don't believe they are being wholly truthful, Headmaster. He tried again but got interrupted. Innocent until proved guilty, Severus, he said firmly. Snape looked furious. So did Filch. But in the end, none of them got what they wanted. After explaining about the cure with the mandrakes, Dumbledore got interrupted by Lockhart, who offered to make it but only earned the ire of Snape. Why not ordering some mandrakes, Professor? Asked Matthew. Wouldn't that be faster? That would be indeed the case, Mr. Mason. But unfortunately, grown mandrakes are quite expensive. The school doesn't have the budget to afford them, so the best choice, for now, is to grow them ourselves. Explained the headmaster, looking a bit sad and older than he was. Probably remembering the troubles of running the school. I see. That's unfortunate. Replied Matthew. There was a very awkward pause while Snape still looked icily at Lockhart. You may go, Dumbledore said to Matthew, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. They went, as quickly as they could without actually running. When they were a floor up from Lockhart's office, they turned into an empty classroom and closed the door quietly behind them. Chapter 116, of Squibs and Snakes. Inside the empty classroom, Matthew directly addressed Harry, who dragged them here. You have questions, Harry. Shouldn't I tell them about the voice I heard? Asked Harry, concerned about the fact that he was the only one hearing the voice of a killer. Not really. Dumbledore already knows of it since he scanned your minds against your will, and the other teachers don't need to know. They just would treat you differently and with suspicion. I respect the teachers, but they are narrow-minded," replied Matthew while Hermione looked at him a bit offended. "Don't look at me like that, Hermione, you know it is true. Just think about how they allow Professor Snape to treat Harry. They are good people, but wizards generally lack common sense and logic." But she stopped herself as she thought more about it. "He's right, you know. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world," added Ron his 2 cents. "See?" whispered Matthew to Hermione since Ron just proved his last sentence. The girl meanwhile stared at him with disbelief that he was using Ron as an example for wizard kind. "You do believe me, don't you?" asked Harry worried. "Course I do," said Ron quickly. "But, you must admit it's weird." "Don't worry about it, Harry. You most likely have a magical gift. Many families in the wizarding world had abilities in their bloodline. Like Luna's special sight. Or before you were in Hogwarts there was an older student with the metamorph Magus ability. She could change her appearance at will. Unfortunately, this is most likely the origin of the whole pureblood nonsense," explained Matthew. "My first thought was that you were a natural Legilimens. But that isn't possible. I would have felt that with my occlumency since you can't control it. You most likely have an ability that we don't know yet. Maybe you can feel murderous intent in form of a voice." Bullshitted Matthew, not wanting to reveal his cards yet. Harry visibly relaxed at that since that explanation made sense. He was worried that he was going mad. He decided to change the topic and talk more about the events of tonight. "What was that writing on the wall about?" "The chamber has been opened." "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know, it rings a sort of bell," said Ron slowly. "I think someone told me a story about a secret chamber at Hogwarts once, might have been Bill. There is not much on it in the library," commented Matthew, which was true. A chamber of secrets is only mentioned in some older history books, about legends of Hogwarts. But the legend was never clearly explained. Maybe if we had older copies of Hogwarts history, we would find something on it. But not sure where to get one. "And what on earth's a squib?" said Harry. To his surprise, Ron stifled a snigger. While Matthew had to chuckle at that. "I knew you didn't know what that was. Ron should explain that. He probably knows more about it, since he lived his whole life in the wizarding world." "Well, it's not funny really, but as it's Filch," he said. "A squib is someone who was born into a wizarding family but hasn't got any magic powers. Kind of the opposite of muggle-born wizards, but squibs are quite unusual. If Filch is trying to learn magic from a quick spell course, I reckon he must be a squib. It would explain a lot. Like why he hates students so much." Ron gave a satisfied smile. "He's bitter." "Probably," commented Matthew, while Harry realized why Filch was that upset. A clock chimed somewhere. "It's midnight," said Matthew. "Let's better head to our common rooms, before Snape or Filch catches us and try to frame us for something." Harry and Ron left for the Gryffindor common room, while Matthew accompanied Hermione to the Ravenclaw common room. On the way, the girl questioned him about the events of tonight, about his diagnostic spells, and especially his knowledge of the Chamber of Secrets. Once they arrived in their common room, they split up and headed for their respective sleeping dorms. Inside his own, his roommate was already waiting for him, ready to question him. After clearing the facts up so that the truth that Matthew wanted to spread would spread through his friends, they headed to bed. While Matthew decided to head into his trunk, which wasn't unusual for his friends since he slept often inside his own bed in the trunk, The reality was a bit different. For Matthew, the day wasn't over yet. He had to solve a question that he had for a while now. He directly headed into his lab, where he headed for an area where he had quite a bit of space. Serpent Sorcerer. He cast. This was one of the spells he mastered already in his first year at Hogwarts. A dark green snake appeared out of his outstretched finger and landed at the spot he was pointing. It was a Chinese green snake. He summoned a non-venomous snake to test out if he was a Parselmouth. His mastery over the spell was good enough to be that specific. Just as he was about to address the snake, he heard it. What happened? Where am I? Asked the snake, confused by its sudden whereabouts. And confirmed for Matthew that he wasn't imagining things back then. He actually understood snakes. He knew for sure he wasn't able to in the past, since he tested it out when he learned the snake summoning charm in his first year. There was only one event he could think of that could have caused it. Before he delved deeper into that topic, he still had to try one thing out. He looked at the snake, remembering that Harry only could speak Parcel tongue while looking at snakes or their pictures, and concentrated on it. Hello. Greeted Matthew with his first successful word in Parcel. I am sorry for having disturbed you. There was something I wanted to test out, so I summoned you. The green snake looked at Matthew. A speaker. I have heard of your kind. Don't worry about it. How can I help you? Asked the snake, exited while it stared at Matthew. You already did. I wanted to know if I was able to speak the noble tongue of snakes, which we are currently doing. Thank you for your help, chuckled Matthew as he answered the snake in Parcel. The both of them chatted for a while before he sent the friendly green snake back where it was before. He long since developed a counter spell for the snake summoning charm, since he disliked the practice of killing a snake with the snake banishing charm. Instead, he used a reverse snake summoning charm which sent the summoned snake back from where it came. Normally wizards wouldn't bother creating such charms since they accomplished the same with just killing it off, but Matthew had no problem creating spells with the help of the AI chip. He used his advantage to create a ton of spells that had minimal usefulness, but through it, his understanding of magic deepened. The only way for me to become a Parselmouth was while healing my soul with Voldemort Horcrux. He muttered as he headed into his storage, inside one of the many cupboards where the materials and test probes of his past experimentation. He was researching souls for a while now. And his main source for ingredients related to his soul was himself. Inside this cupboard, he had some very small vials filled with crystallized soul essence. They were from the time when he tried to reproduce it himself artificially. He was able to extract small amounts from his own soul and preserve them in crystallized form, just enough not to harm himself. They were from a time before he absorbed the Horcrux, when his soul was in its original state. During his experiments, that the essence of one soul not only contained elements unique to oneself. Some are inherited from one ancestor. His newly discovered ability gave him new insights. Most likely where magical abilities are inherited through souls. So the whole pure blood theory is complete nonsense. Chapter 117, Full Sunday. This is interesting, muttered Matthew as he compared his original soul essence with his current one. There were slight differences between both of them. Large parts of them had the same markers and were similar in most aspects, but at some points, the nature of his soul essence changed and became the same as Tom Riddle's. Once he compared it with a sample of the Horcrux. They were mostly different, but some small parts of his own soul absorbed and adapted to Voldemort's. I am not related to him. concluded Matthew, since he could, similar to a DNA test concludes the blood relation between two people. The parts of my soul that were used up during my fight with Nightmare were replaced by some parts of the Horcrux soul essence. Instead of completely reforming into the original soul essence, it rather combined with mine and made me a Parselmouth. But I am not related to Slytherin or Voldemort. The markers for that are in a completely different part of the soul, concluded Matthew. Too bad. The basilisk would recognize me even less as heir of Slytherin than Harry. And I won't be able to trick any inheritance tests to get to any vaults, since my blood isn't related to them in any way. Matthew spent the next few hours researching the changes to his soul for any other side effects, negative or positive. After confirming that that was the only change, it was already early in the morning, and his usual schedule would begin soon. He directly headed to his bedroom and took out the time tuner. In the last few weeks, he made sure to test whether it still was working. After a row of experiments, he even sent one of his drones into the past. Of course, he ordered it to disconnect and only connect once it past self-traveled into the past to not cause any time paradox. That experiment was a huge success. It confirmed that the time tuner was indeed fully functional. He now had much more time at his hands. Inside his bedroom, he used his time turner to travel back a few hours to the beginning of the night shortly before he originally entered the trunk and locked his bedroom door. Then he lay down onto his bed. Sarah, wake me up 15 minutes before my past self enters the bedroom, so I can unlock the door again and hide in the bathroom, requested Matthew before closing his eyes. After hearing the confirmation of his AI, he fell into the world of dreams. Scene break. Next day. While the majority of the students were still distracted by the attack on Mrs. Norris last night, the students were trying to find out more about the Chamber of Secrets, and which caused all copies of Hogwarts: A History to be borrowed out, while the library was filled with students, on a Sunday. Meanwhile, Matthew wasn't bothered by that. He rather experimented with his newfound gift and began to befriend the snakes in the area of the castle, and even summoned some that fit into this habitat. After all, information were everything, and having a spy network nobody really paid attention to would be invaluable. So he decided to take full advantage of his gift and began to establish it. In the evening he spent time with his friends in the common room. As it became darker outside, more of the Ravenclaws headed to bed. After a while, Matthew was the only person remaining in the common room. Shortly before midnight, he placed a privacy charm around him so he wouldn't be overheard. At point midnight, the Grey Lady appeared through a wall. "Hello, Lady Helena," greeted Matthew. "What did you do to it? It's no longer there. His taint is slowly fading from the castle." She directly began to question him. "The taint is slowly fading. Could it be the curse on the Dada position? Was it bound to the diadem? Since it is only fading, it's still there. Which is good, since I need the curse so I can take advantage of the timeline." "No need to worry, Lady Helena. As already mentioned, I cleansed the diadem of your mother from the Horcrux. Unfortunately, it also destroyed any enchantments on it. It is now only a historically valuable artifact made of goblin silver," explained Matthew as he pulled the diadem out of an expanded pouch around his waist. The moment the diadem appeared, tears appeared on the grey face of Helena Ravenclaw as she stared at the diadem from a close range. She even tried to touch it with her ghostly hands, but they passed through it. "Mother," she whispered, "it's really free of his influence. I can't feel any of the darkness that surrounded it previously." "Thank you. Don't worry about it. The one who found it was Voldemort and left a piece of his soul inside it, which shackled him to life. Since I am one of the people he would kill in his mad ambition, I need to kill him," explained Matthew. "I hope you are okay if I keep the diadem." "Yes, you can keep it. As long as you honor the legacy of my mother, I am fine with it. After all, you are one of the students who completed her inheritance," replied the ghost much warmer with a smile which he has never seen before on her. He was probably the first student who saw her smile. "About that, I have a few questions. Did the other founders also leave something in the castle? I see, you are a hunter for knowledge. I won't tell you where or what exactly they are, but each of the founders left something for future generations behind. Although the legacy of Sorlaser was repeatedly misused in the past, like yesterday. But nobody found the reward yet," commented the Grey Lady. Thank you. You confirmed my theories. So the legacy of Sorlaser is in the Chamber of Secrets and it isn't the monster," realized Matthew. He talked with the Grey Lady a bit longer, who was very welcoming to him now. She was a very wise and knowledgeable person, which was a useful contact for Matthew to have. Although he was a bit disappointed that she didn't pass on to the next life. This was one of the things he tried to confirm today, whether a ghost would pass on once its regrets are solved. He wanted to gather data on that information. Either the diadem wasn't her regret, or there was no passing on like in the legends and movies of the non-magical world. At this point, he couldn't confirm the truth. Scene break. For a few days, the school could talk of little else but the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's minds by pacing the spot where she had been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. He was seen scrubbing the message on the wall with Mrs. Scour's all-purpose magical mess remover, but to no effect. The words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he was skulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly and looking happy. Him always guarding the place was annoying for Matthew, who wanted to check out the location for any entrances to the Chamber of Secrets. But Mr. Filch was there all day long and punished any student passing by. Since Matthew didn't want to waste his time with some useless detentions, so he had no choice to postpone his investigation. He didn't dare to explore it at night since the basilisk doesn't appear on his map. Sorlaser Slytherin seems to have excluded it from the wards, preventing anybody from locating the chamber. Matthew didn't want to fight it yet. Chapter 118, Hogsmeade Plans. The basilisk attack was the most discussed topic amongst the students of Hogwarts. Once Hermione asked Professor Binns in her history class about the legend of the chamber, the legend spread through the castle. That Sorlaser Slytherin, one of the 4 legendary founders of Hogwarts, left somewhere hidden in the castle a chamber containing a monster, a powerful creature waiting to fulfill his last wish. Purging all Muggleborns from the castle, at least that was what the legends stated and was suggested in the Harry Potter books. But Matthew wasn't any more sure about that. It's been around 1,000 years since the founding of Hogwarts. The legend passed many retellings. Even in his past life, the topic was discussed controversially amongst the Harry Potter fandom. Not everything was always like it looked. If he were to take a deeper look at the founders, would they really work with someone who was, at least in today's legends, inherently evil? During his discussion with the Grey Lady a few days ago, she also talked quite fondly about all the founders, including Sorlaser. Maybe his ideas and ideals just got twisted over the centuries through the evil and mad deeds of his descendants like Tom Riddle and similar. Matthew actually feels a form of kinship to Sorlaser Slytherin. He felt that he was the founder that represented his ideals the most. His ideals were the most useful if someone's goal was power. Matthew himself wasn't a hero or a person trying to do good. No, his main focus was himself and his friends and family, and he would use everything to accomplish what he wanted, which he felt was similar to what Salazar Slytherin believed in. Sharing the same gift as him also helped increase his goodwill towards the deceased founder. Many people were affected by the attack, but most of all were Ginny Weasley. Ron believed the cause was the petrification of Mrs. Norris since apparently, she loved cats. "But you haven't really got to know Mrs. Norris," Ron told her bracingly. "Honestly, we're much better off without her." Ginny's lip trembled. "Stuff like this doesn't often happen at Hogwarts," Ron assured her. "They'll catch the maniac who did it and have him out of here in no time. I just hope he's got time to petrify Filch before he's expelled." "I'm only joking," Ron added hastily as Ginny. But Matthew knew the true reason. The red-headed first year already began to experience blackouts, where she lost hours of her time without remembering what she did. Meanwhile, the hold of the Horcrux over her became much stronger recently. According to Matthew's analysis of the data he collected about a Horcrux possession, there should be no lasting after-effects besides psychological damage that could be resolved afterward, if the Horcrux was destroyed before it completed its revival. Once it was destroyed, all of the stolen life force will return to the owner it originally belonged to. This seemed to be one of the properties of life force Matthew discovered in his research. This would also happen if he absorbed the Horcrux. This was one of Matthew's targets this year. After all, how could he pass on a chance of strengthening his soul further and enlarging his magical reserves with it? The Horcrux was a part of the soul stored inside an object, while the stolen life force was also stored inside the object. It would, later on, form a new body. If this process was interrupted by removing or destroying the soul, the life force would escape since there was nothing keeping it there anymore. Scene break. While the whole school worried about the basilisk attack and Harry being the heir of Slytherin, their original suspect Matthew was a Muggle-born, which made the whole Slytherin house protest against these rumors, while Matthew could just laugh about them, and imagined what would happen if he outed himself as Parselmouth now. Obviously he wouldn't do something so stupid, although it was an amusing idea. Meanwhile, Matthew and his friends were currently discussing their plans for the first Hogsmeade weekend that was approaching. Since it was already November, the first Hogsmeade weekend was announced. It would happen 1 week after the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin on the 7th of November. Every student third year and above was already anticipating the opportunity to leave the castle, especially since the attack. Just as they were discussing their plans for the weekend, Cho passed them. Matthew realized that it would be the first time she was going to Hogsmeade since it was her third year, and because she became close to him, she didn't form a deep friendship with her original friend Marietta. "Hey Cho, do you want to go to Hogsmeade?" he asked. As he asked that, his friends began to stare at him with a stunning look but remained silent. Cho stared at Matthew as her cheeks began to redden and she replied, "Sure, I would love to. When do you want to meet?" "How about at 9 a.m. in the Great Hall? We could get a nice breakfast and leave then," answered Matthew while thinking about it. "That sounds good, see you then," she replied as she quickly began to leave. "Yes, ouch." Just at that moment he got kicked under the table by Roger. Cho was already out of ear range. "Oi, what was that for?" asked Matthew, confused why he was suddenly kicked. His friends stared at each other for a moment and began to sigh. "For all your intelligence in class and magic, you are really clueless sometime," said Harold while shaking his head. Matthew meanwhile was visibly confused. what do you mean? Do you really have no idea what just happened? Asked Roger. I asked Jo if she wanted to join us for the Hogsmeade trip. What is your problem with that? Blake took the book he was currently reading and hit Matthew on the head. We don't have any problems with Jo joining us to Hogsmeade. But that's not what you asked for, idiot. Ouch, stop hitting me. What do you mean? Matthew cried out while rubbing his head. You just asked her for a date. We had to stop you from disappointing her or even breaking her heart. You deserve to get hit for being such a dense idiot. Man, it's almost as if you were some kind of dense protagonist of a story. Complained Roger. What? Exclaimed Matthew. I did ask her for a date, didn't I? Realized Matthew as he thought about his choice of words. Man, I should have chosen my words better. What am I supposed to do now? Where should I take her? I have no clue about dates. He cried out. He never really had a date in either of his lives. In his first life, he died before he could take any girls on dates during his study years since he focused on his education. Although he flirted a bit here and there, nothing really happened yet. In this life, he was still too young to have any dating experience. His body is still undergoing puberty, so his emotions are mysterious and complex regarding girls. How should we know you, lucky bastard? We are not older than you. We don't have girls basically throwing themselves at us without even having a clue. They shouted as they stood up and began to surround Matthew. Hey, guys. We can talk about everything. There is no need for violence. He tried to stop them as they began to beat him up as only friends would. Chapter 119, The Heir of Slytherin and Quidditch. You believe what? Asked Matthew, pretending to be flabbergasted. Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin, replied Harry. Look at his family, the whole lot of them have been in Slytherin. He's always boasting about it. They could easily be Slytherin's descendants. His father's definitely evil enough. Let me stop you right there. Why do you think Slytherin was evil? Asked Matthew. But look how the Slytherins are. And he is the ancestor of Voldemort, said Harry while Ron and Hermione flinched at the name. I didn't ask whether Voldemort was evil. I asked you why do you think Salazar Slytherin is evil? But your answer is shallow and lacks insight. First of all, the Slytherin students are not evil, they are just a product of the circumstances they grow up in. And many Slytherins are decent. Did you actually talk with many of them besides Malfoy? Asked Matthew while staring patiently at Harry. The boy didn't know how to reply. But, no, I didn't speak with many of them. He replied downcast. Exactly, you didn't. There are many decent Slytherins who actually resisted Voldemort as good they could or outright fled the country during the last war. Your dislike for Slytherins is solely based on your interactions with Snape and Malfoy, and Ron's bias against them. Oi, the slimy snakes are no good. It's no bias, it's the truth. Interrupted Ron. Sigh. No, not all Slytherin are bad or even evil. Nobody is born evil or becomes evil through a sorting of the hat. It's the circumstances they grow up in that turns someone evil. There are many good Slytherins. In your year, for example, I would suggest you try to talk to Tracy Davis or Daphne Greengrass. Their families belong to the same political faction in the Wizengamot as the Potters before the war, replied Matthew. What is the Wizengamot? And my family was part of it? Asked Harry, visibly confused. It is still part of it. The Wizengamot is basically the parliament and government of magical Britain. The seats are hereditary and your family has one. Dumbledore is currently your proxy until you come of age, to my knowledge. Since you are still too young," explained Matthew. "I see," answered Harry thoughtfully. "And which faction was my family part of? Which factions are even there?" "There are basically 3 factions. The light under Dumbledore, the dark faction under Lucius Malfoy, and lastly the grey faction under the leadership of Amelia Bones, the aunt of Susan Bones, and Cyrus Greengrass, the father of Daphne Greengrass. The Potters were until the Wizarding War against the Voldemort part of the grey faction. Once it wasn't possible to remain neutral anymore, your father joined Dumbledore's side as the Bones did. While the Greengrass family left the country until Voldemort's fall," he explained. "That sounds complex. But if I understand you right, my family was rather neutral?" asked Harry. "Yes, basically the Grey faction wanted to keep their ancient traditions while also accepting Muggleborns. While the Dark hate Muggleborns. And the Light is against the traditions of the Wizarding world. This is a very simple summary. I would suggest you do your own reading on the topic. There is a century worth of records about the politics of the Wizarding world in the library. And the Potter play a large part in it. So you could also learn more about your family," suggested Matthew with a smile. "Okay, I will do that," nodded Harry. "But Salazar Slytherin could still be evil," interjected Ron. "I don't think so. It's my opinion on what we know. But Hermione, what did you know about witches and wizards before learning about magic? Especially during the Middle Ages." "Of course. The witch hunts. In the non-magical world, there were centuries worth of witch hunts." "You mean?" asked the brown-haired girl. "Yes, I believe the conflict between the founders was about accepting Muggleborns in Hogwarts. Back then it was different times. Witches and wizards got hunted down by non-magicals and burnt on stakes. This was also the reason why the Wizarding world began to hide," explained Matthew. "Do you really think if Slytherin was evil, he would found a school with the other founders? Or the House Slytherin would be still allowed to exist by Professor Dumbledore? It's more likely that Salazar Slytherin was concerned about the connection of the Muggleborns to their non-magical family. Most like he wanted to either forbid them from attending Hogwarts or permanently take them from their families. Since both are rather extreme options, the other founders disagreed with him." "That makes actually sense," muttered Harry. "And why did he leave the chamber behind?" challenged Ron. "Back then the magical world was still public. The non-magicals could decide to attack Hogwarts any time. So Salazar may have decided to leave something behind to guard the castle and its students. But the centuries of mouth-to-mouth propaganda, and the political climate of the Wizarding world weren't good for him and made him into an evil wizard in the general public. Dependents like Voldemort didn't help this cause," suggested Matthew. "Okay, Salazar Slytherin isn't necessarily bad," admitted Ron hesitantly, "but Malfoy still could be the heir of Slytherin. He would fit the whole evil descendant type," suggested Ron. "I don't think so. Malfoy is too dumb for it. But I think nothing I say would stop you from your plan," sighed Matthew while secretly being pleased with himself. "Well, my goal was just to get Harry interested in politics and his family so I get influence over the Wizengamot in the future. Malfoy could know who the heir of Slytherin is even if he isn't it himself," suggested Harry. "So you want to sneak into the Slytherin common room under Polyjuice Potion and ask him?" "Yes, so can you help us? Do you have the recipe? Asked Hermione. I have the recipe. I will give you the one I improved myself. It still takes 1 month to make, but the ingredients are cheaper to get. So you won't need to break into Snape's potion storage. Said Matthew, don't look at me like that. I know that is something you would do. And if I may give you a tip. Find out where in the dungeons their common room is. It will save you time and let you ask more questions. If you take the shape of Crabbe and Goyle, you could just stand in front of it and pretend you forgot the password. Hinted Matthew as he wrote down one of the polyjuice recipes he created to sell in Diagon Alley. Scene break. The highly anticipated Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin was here. Slytherin with their new and faster brooms was pressuring the Gryffindor team the whole game. Their dirty playstyle was also aiding their advantage. But the Gryffindor team was made of high-quality players, all of them had a considerable amount of talent for the game. This time around Dobby wasn't trying to save Harry's life by sending a destructive black iron ball called Bludger after him. Without the pressure of the deadly ball targeting him, Harry beat Malfoy, who was at most an average player and only bought his place on the team with the money of his father, by a large margin. In their final confrontation, Harry and Malfoy had a head-on-head race for the snitch while racing at the ground. With his better control over his broom and greater experience, Harry caught the snitch and stopped before the ground. Malfoy wasn't that fortunate, he crashed into the ground and broke his leg. But lucky for him, help was already on its way, in the form of a fellow blonde Dada teacher. While the Gryffindors were celebrating their victory, Malfoy got carried by his team to the medical wing where he would need to spend a painful night of regrowing his vanished bones. In the end, Gryffindor would be again the hardest competition this year for the other house teams. Even with Slytherin's new brooms. It seemed that fate still played a role in this world. Even with Dobby's absence, someone ended up in the hospital wing, but this time instead of Harry, Malfoy ended up with the vanished bones. Will Lucius Malfoy tries to murder Lockhart, wondered Matthew as he left the game with his friends. Chapter 120, Hogsmeade Date. In the night after the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin, the basilisk attacked once again. This time Colin Creevey, the somewhat hyperactive stalker of Harry from Gryffindor, got petrified this time. With that, the first human victim got attacked and fear actually began to spread through the castle. The young first-year student was attacked on his way back to the Gryffindor Tower after the match. He was only alive thanks to the camera he always carried around with him. Malfoy, who spent the night in the hospital wing regrowing the bones in his left leg, was the first student who knew of the attack since he was present as the professor carried Colin into the hospital wing. He didn't shy away to spread the rumors of the first mudblood being shown its place in the wizarding world the next day. This earned him the ire of many Gryffindors, and particularly Fred and George, who decided to mainly target the young Malfoy in their pranks over the next few weeks. At the same time, it confirmed even more for the Golden Trio that Malfoy knew who the heir of Slytherin was. And they began to prepare for their plan to infiltrate the Slytherin common room and question Malfoy. Meanwhile, Matthew was distracted by something else entirely. What should he do for his date with Cho? Even with the attack, the Hogsmeade weekend wasn't cancelled since there was no danger in the village. The students were more safer there than in the castle. It still meant Matthew had to plan out a date. And he had no idea. Scene break. Saturday, the 14th of November, 1992. On the morning of the day that the Hogsmeade trip was happening, Matthew waited outside the Great Hall of Hogwarts. He wore one of his casual outfits that looked like clothes of the non-magical world but were made by Madame Mackins with all kinds of useful enchantments on them. He was slightly nervous as he never been in this kind of situation before. As he was deep in his thoughts, someone tapped him on his shoulder. "Hey, did you have to wait long?" It was Cho. She arrived while he was distracted and approached him. Currently, she wore jeans, a blue shirt with a jacket over it, since it was slightly cold outside. "Hello, Cho." "Not at all. I just finished my breakfast." "You look cute." He replied quickly. "Cute? Very smooth, Matthew. You are a charmer. Calm down. It's just a casual date. Just two students going to Hogsmeade together. Nothing special." Slightly blushing, Cho replied, "Thank you. I wasn't sure what I should wear, but since we are visiting the village I kept it casual." Casual was the right choice. "I planned to show you around the village today." "Did you have breakfast already?" "Yes, I woke up early today. So I finished my breakfast a while ago," replied Cho with a smile. "Then let's go." "So Cho, are there any things you want to see in Hogsmeade?" asked Matthew, trying to start a conversation. He didn't want to talk about Hogwarts right now since any conversation about the Chamber of Secrets would dampen the mood of the date. "Oh, I absolutely would love to see the Shrieking Shack. I heard it is the most haunted place in Britain. I would also love to see your favorite spots in the village." "You like scary places?" "Well, the Shrieking Shack was definitely on my list of places I wanted to show you. I will also introduce the best shops on the way. Honeyduke's, for example, is a must-visit stop on any trip to Hogsmeade," replied Matthew while chuckling. Now that he broke the initial ice on the conversation, they fell into comfortable chatter. As they left the castle, Cho linked her hand with his while having a look of determination on her face beforehand. Matthew, although a bit startled at first, had nothing against that interaction. The whole morning they visited all the hot spots of the village while enjoying their date. Cho loved the Shrieking Shack, although she was disappointed that nobody could enter it since it was barricaded. Time passed as both Ravenclaws enjoyed their time together. "I am getting slightly thirsty. How about we visit the Three Broomsticks? It's the most popular pub amongst Hogwarts students," offered Matthew after they explored the village for a while already and just came close to the popular pub. "That would be nice. I am also getting a bit tired from walking around," nodded Cho. They entered into the warmth of the cozy pub, that was currently filled with Hogwarts students. Roger, Harold, and Blake were also there and grinned at him as he entered with Cho. Just as he wanted to join them, these assholes called some other fellow Ravenclaws to their table so that there was no spot for him, and Cho left and began to laugh at him as they shook their head. "That table over there seems to be empty," pointed Cho out from the side. She didn't register the antics of his friends. "Okay. How about you occupy it and I will get us some drinks? Are you fine with butterbeer?" "Yes, that would be nice." After Matthew got the drinks, he joined Cho on the table. "Here, your butterbeer." "Thank you. How much do I owe you?" she asked. "Don't worry, it's on me," he replied as he sat down beside her, continuing their chat. "So Cho, you said your parents are from Nepal. Why did they leave?" "Well, although there are magic users in Nepal, wizards were the minority. There were no schools or districts for wizards to live in. And most of the others already left the country, so my parents decided to head for Britain when they got pregnant with me. They wanted me to have the best education and as many opportunities as possible," she explained. "But couldn't they join the other groups of magic users in the country?" he asked, a bit confused. Not really, to my understanding they are very hidden from the outside world and rarely interact with wizards. The magic they learn seems also to be different from wizarding magic. To my understanding, there were two groups. One of them uses the energy inside their body to practice a form of material arts. The other group seemed to be not born as wizards, but I have no idea how they do magic. My parents did not know much about them besides their existence. They didn't want to interact with wizards, explained Cho. I see. That sounds interesting. I really want to visit Nepal one day to check them out, replied Matthew, a bit in thought. They are absolutely worth checking out. The techniques of the martial artist may help me to improve my body beyond its limits. I will absolutely pay them a visit in the future. And these other magic users may have access to demonic rituals and gain magic through deals with them if they weren't born as magic users. Absolutely knowledge worth to acquire, he thought. Matthew and Cho continued with their date. They really enjoyed each other's company today. But all things had to end. Because of the basilisk attacks in the castle, they had to return before dinner so they wouldn't move through the castle during the night. Once they arrived in the castle, they had dinner together before they headed to the Ravenclaw common room together. As they stood before the entrance to the common room, "Thank you for taking me out today, Matthew. I know you didn't plan to actually ask me on a date. But I still enjoyed it," she said, shocking Matthew a bit. What? Yeah, you are right. He sighed, but I also enjoyed it. I really would like to repeat it in the future. Me too. Let's be friends for now and see what happens in the future, she said as she kissed his cheek before rushing into the common room, leaving a confused Matthew behind. It took him a while to process what just happened before he chuckled and also returned to his dorm. He was not dating yet, but his youth was heading in a nice direction. Completely different from his past life. That's it, guys. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me in the comments what you want to see next and if you have any recommendations.